Hi everyone. I will start by sharing PowerPoint that I prepared. Mm, okay. 공유됐어? Okay, this chapter is based on, to some extent, our general understanding and reading of East Asian historical heritages and environment. First two chapters, chapter 2 and 3, are kind of background chapters. Chapter 4 is a kind of main chapter for economic development in macroeconomic terms, covering basically pretty much earlier period up until President Park's regime from 1953 to 1976. We can define this period a very high growth period of Korean economy. Okay. The reason why chapter 4 is so important is because it introduces a very important economic analytical skill called growth accounting. And to understand throughout the entirety of this textbook, you need to understand and learn how to conduct growth accounting, how to interpret growth accounting, or nation's economic development or economic growth pattern. So probably today's lecture, second half will be devoted to, I think, growth accounting technique, an explanation how you interpret growth accounting. Okay. This chapter starts, political events have repeatedly interrupted the Korean economic growth, as we have seen in historical terms. In chapter 2 and chapter 3, 1945 liberation year, in other words, Korean Peninsula was liberated from Japanese imperial rule due to World War II ending. So the liberation came through 1945, but there was a chaotic situation because the northern half was occupied by Soviet troops, and Kim Il-sung regime was establishing DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. On the other hand, the other south half of the Korean Peninsula was backed up and occupied by American troops and United Nations troops. And the other half, southern half, was called the Republic of Korea and South Korea. But immediately 1953, there was a kind of Korean War. During this event, most important thing is, I think I may write here, maybe here, South introduced South Korean government. Introduced land reform. In 1949. This is the most important economic event, introduced land reform. On the other hand, North Korea did not bother with introducing land reform because North Korea, by definition, was socialist tradition-based economy. So North Korea took it for granted that all the lands belong to government, states. No private ownership was allowed. Therefore, there was no need to go through land reform. But in South Korea, of course, private ownership of land and other properties were allowed in the tradition of capitalist economy. Therefore, South Korean government introduced kind of land reform in 1949. When the armistice was signed in 1953, truce, in other words, end of the war. But it's not permanent end of the war. It is kind of temporary end of the war. So we call armistice. Was signed in 1953. The level of production of the Korean economy was far below what it had been during the early 1940s under Japanese rule. In other words, Korean economy, particularly the South Korean economy, was deteriorated, backpedaled. Instead of making progress, kind of retarded. Rather than making forward progress, backward progress. Per capita GNP was $134 at 1970, constant prices. Output declined from 1939-1940, before end of World War II, net commodity product data. In other words, from 1939 to 1940, roughly about 20 years, Korean economy could not make any progress, got deteriorated. In 1953, 1957, just after Korean War, South Korean government gave priority to reconstruction of the infrastructure. And then afterwards, price stabilization more than growth. This is very important keyword. In other words, immediately after 1953, 1957, a more important thing, there is no more than important things in infrastructure rebuilding, bridging gaps. Bridge was destroyed. A lot of infrastructure was destroyed. So it has to be reconstruction was primary economic policy target. Priority was given to reconstruction. Then, once reconstruction is in making progress, price stabilization more than growth. The reason is because after 1950, 1953 war, agricultural production was damaged. A lot of commodity production facility, manufacturing facility was gone. So there were not enough commodities or farm products produced. So there were absolute lack of food and necessities, commodities. Therefore, inflation was hyperinflation. And hyperinflation is the keyword where at which inflation rate reaches over 50%, 100%, at times 200 or 300%. For example, German economy or East European economy, 1950, after 1945, went through similar hyperinflation period because of war damages during World War II. All the commodities, farm products were not normal, but there were a lot of population increase after war. Therefore, there was a shortage of food, shortage of commodities. Therefore, what happens? Inflation is hyperinflation. So South Korean situation, I think North Korea too, was the similar situation. Priority had to be given to reconstruction of the infrastructure at the first. Afterwards, price stabilization more than growth. So that was the period 1950s. Large quantities of aid-financed food, medicines, machinery, raw materials arrived in Korea. From United Nations, from US dominantly, Korea's 1953 GNP was US 2715 million and 1970 prices. Therefore, about 10% of Korea's GNP was occupied by foreign aid. So foreign aid helped Korea's GNP up to about 10%. Over 70% of Korea's imports were financed by foreign grants. In other words, fuel, sugar, all necessity goods, oil, all these things, 70% of Korea's imports could not be financed by export because there was almost non-existing export performance. So foreign grants, foreign aid financed about 70% of Korea's imports. during this time. We call counterpart funds generated by sales of grant aid dollars provided a non-inflationary source of domestic currency, financing for investment. What does that mean? It's a little bit technically difficult explanation you need. What it means, if foreigners, particularly United States, hands out dollars, so many $1 million, thousands of dollars to Korean government, that will fuel Korean money. When converted to Korean won from dollar, Korean monetary volume will be greatly increased, right? Doubled, maybe tripled. Then what is inflation? When commodity is 100, matching money is 100, then price stability is 100. But when commodity is 100, matching money is 500, 5 times more than commodity. What would be inflation? Inflation would be like 5 times accelerating inflation. So to protect the country in question, Korea, what they give in foreign aid, not dollar, but for example, crops, wheat, rice, barley, we call kind of grant aid dollars, so that what they give actually Korea is commodity, crops, farm products. Then, you know what Korean government do? Receive those grants in aid. In other words, receive those farm aid products from United States, from United Nations, and sell those rice, barley, wheat, fuel, all those commodity in kind to the market. And funds are created. That funds we call counterpart funds. Why do they do that? By doing that, they can protect the economy from hyperinflation. Because actually rice is needed, therefore rice is aided by United States. So rice will be in the market, okay? And the sales funds of rice will be created as a counterpart funds. So those counterpart funds will be used by Korean government as expenditure. In other words, counterpart funds is vehicle to protect the economy from hyperinflation. So instead of money inflow, they create commodity in kind, farm products in kind flow to the market. So to put down inflation. In addition, another important policy direction is inward-looking industrial policy and import substitution in the 1950s, rather than outward-looking industrial policy and export promotion in the 1960s. This is a very important remark. You know, always please remember this remark. Third remark, what's the difference between 1950s, 1960s? 1960s, Korea's industrial policy target was called inward-looking industrial policy and import substitution policy. On the other hand, 1960s, just opposite case, outward-looking industrial policy and export promotion in the 1960s instead of import substitution. Then what's the difference? Why Korean government had to go pursue inward-looking industrial policy and import substitution in 1950s rather than outward-looking industrial policy and export promotion in the 1960s? Okay, that can be explained by so-called, let me see. First gap is created because always is a foreign exchange gap. What is foreign exchange? Simply dollar, for example, internationally available dollar. What is foreign exchange gap? Is always export minus import is always, we call this as a trade balance. This can be always negative in many developing countries. Why? They do not have enough export. Export is always small. What they can export is very small. Import demand is always big. Therefore, when export is $100 billion, import is $120 billion, $20 billion trade deficit. Suppose export is $1 billion and import is $1.5 billion. Then trade balance is minus $0.5 billion. Right? So always in many developing countries, this first gap exists, foreign exchange gap. In other words, they are always in shortage of dollars. Why? They can earn shortage of dollar from exporting, but they can only export very small. Their import demand is always big. Therefore, trade balance is always negative. That we call first gap. Second gap we can create second gap that is always domestic saving is small. But minus investment demand is always big. So what happens to this in domestic saving? This becomes savings gap. Investment gap. Therefore, they had to borrow funds from abroad. These two gap, first gap and second gap, is the consequence of this one. Here, twin gap. And twin gap, I inserted here, twin gap. Okay, so here, inward-looking industrial policy and import substitution in 1950s. They wanted to import a lot of materials, but they didn't have foreign dollar because they could not sell any reasonable export amount. So they were always in shortage of dollar. Therefore, during 1950s, they could not do anything else except save on import substitution. So instead of, importing a lot of sugar cane, a lot of oil, a lot of, hygiene, a lot of textile products, they try to substitute by localizing. So in other words, they try to, through Samsung. Samsung started as a sugar importer. So they allowed import licensing to Samsung so that Samsung can be allowed to import a lot of sugar, cane, and then domestic substitute, domestically produced sugar. I don't know whether you know of Korean chaebols like Lucky Gold Star. Lucky Gold Star originally started as import quota holder. In other words, LG, Lucky Gold Star Group were allowed to import a lot of hygienes. In other words, a lot of pharmaceutical products, so that they could substitute, they could localize production of toothpaste. Previously, all toothpaste in South Korea were imported 100%. And domestic substitution, that way, they could save on dollar. You see? Only after 1960s, due to President Park's outward-looking industrial policy, normalization of diplomatic relations with Japan, and foreign capital inflow, they started building export base. So a lot of light industries like wig, plywood, textile goods could be developed as exporters. These export industries started making foreign dollar, so that this export promotion could be pursued 1960s. Okay. The official foreign exchange rate overvalued despite large periodic devaluations. What is periodic devaluations? Periodic devaluation is something like that. For example, suppose I here periodic devaluation. Suppose $1 was trade 1,000 won, but devalued to $1, 2,000. Then exporter는 $1 exporter는 suppose you exported $1 much to Japan, and you go to the bank. When you presented $1, that $1 becomes now 2,000. So exporters gain, importers lose. Why? Devaluation. So devaluation promotes exports and discourages imports. Okay, so this is the mechanics. Okay. So this is the twin gap theory and devaluation story. Okay, so in other words, if government devalues its currency, it helps exporters. On the other hand, hurts importers. Okay, so if you understand that, you can easily find out that hyperinflation and stabilization programs in the 1950s and economic policy changes after 1962. So hyperinflation, as I mentioned, wholesale price index dropped from 531% almost unimaginable rate of hyperinflation in 1951, just after 1950, Korean War. Unimaginable hyperinflation, but so much no commodity, no crops, no food, nothing was available just after 1950. So, but it came down to 28%, 1953-55, but rose again 82%, 1955. This is a very turmoil, very unstable post-Korean War economic situation, inflation-wise. Following the advice of the US aid mission, eliminated large government deficit in 1957, reduced money supply from 62% to 29%. In 1957, 20%, relative price stability was restored. And then followed economic policy changes. 1950s to overcome the scarcity of domestic resources, maximizing foreign assistance rather than domestic savings. Post-war incomes were too low. Interest rates on the organized financial markets were controlled low. Here is two keywords you need to pay attention to. Organized financial market means regular bank financial market. So banking. So official banks financing, we call organized financial market. Unorganized financial markets, we call curve market rate. Or you can say black market. For example, in Russia, when the economic condition of Russian economy is not good, then organized financial market Russia dollar rate is far different from unorganized black market Russia ruble and dollar rate. Even right now, maybe Russia has two markets, black market or official market. And we call organized financial market official market. Unorganized financial market, curve market, or black market. So interest rates on the organized financial markets were controlled low. The reason why it is controlled low, because most of the borrowers from organized financial market is state enterprises. So when government subsidizes state enterprises, they have to give them low interest rate loans. Okay, for example, Gascom, or railroad company, or Russia Railroad Company, Russia Electric Power Company. These companies had to borrow loans from government financial market with low interest rate. So organized financial markets could not give higher interest rate. On the other hand, those companies which are not covered by state enterprise, they are squeezed out from organized financial market. So official banks, state banks, are saying that you are not entitled to our loan borrower. So you go to unorganized market, curve market, borrow from there. Of course, it could be 20%, 30% interest rate. while organized financial market is 5%, 2%, 10%. So these are kind of dual financial markets was the characteristics of the. So the collapse of Syngman Rhee government in 1960, and the U.S. government announced that U.S. assistance would be terminated in the near future. So these, you have to go back chapter 2, chapter 3, how Syngman Rhee government was toppled down in 1960, and U.S. government announced that assistance would be terminated in the near future. The installation of military government and the shift from reconstruction stabilization to rapid industrialization based on exports began to shift. So first 5-year plan, 1962-1967, was drafted and implemented. During this time, Korean economy goes through important stage, so-called the takeoff stage, in 1965. Takeoff stage, what is takeoff stage? It's kind of I don't know whether I can squeeze in Walter Rostow, famous US historian, economic historian, defined this term, takeoff stage. What it means, from a certain economy from pre-takeoff stage traditional stage. All of sudden jumps to like takeoff stage. Like a flight. And the keyword takeoff is per capita income was not growing that fast, very slow, traditional farming society you can imagine. But all of a sudden, the economy is like a airline taking off from the air ground. And economic historians, Walter Rostow, kind of people, found, strangely enough, normal economic conditions do not guarantee takeoff stage. At times, some economies were really under hardship, earthquake, or war, or some kind of famine. You know, hardship makes the economy up to the standard, wake up. So in case of South Korea, up until 1961, Syngman Rhee government being toppled down, the country was before takeoff stage. Everything was so slow, were not proceeding at the rate of more than 2% per year growth rate. But all of a sudden, I think termination of economic aid package from United States gave a news to the public. Okay, US is not going to help us in assist by providing foreign assistance. Then, if we do not produce enough, we will all die of hunger. So that kind of national emergency atmosphere, together with Park's staged coup d'etat, political turmoil, probably made Korean people realize we have to do something else, something abnormal, something on an emergent basis. So it's kind of nationalism, national identity restoration. So take off stage 1965. And then during this period, target growth rate was 7.1%. For industrialization and self-sustaining growth, turning to mobilization of domestic resources. May 1964, won was devalued by 50%. What did I say? If 50% devalued, then exporters gain 50%, importers lose 50% margin, right? So devaluation helps Korean exporters. Korean exporters try to earn more dollars, helping takeoff stage go through. So in 1965, unitary floating exchange rate system and doubled interest rate on deposit loan to increase voluntary private savings and discourage unproductive bank credit. What does that mean? Unitary floating exchange rate system means before 1965 unitary floating exchange rate system, there was a fixed official exchange rate system. So if $1 is 131, until next time, 131 is a fixed rate. But after 1965, floating exchange rate means it could become next day 135, another day 131, depending on foreign dollars supply and demand conditions. So floating exchange rate makes the market more rational, so that it depends on demand and supply of foreign currency, foreign dollars situation. At the same time, doubled interest rate on deposit loans to increase voluntary. In other words, avoided low interest rate policy to make the gap between official organized market and unofficial disorganized market. In other words, unorganized market. That is, increased doubled interest rate means domestic savers are now saying that previously bankers gave them 5% interest rate, now give 15%. Okay, then they will try to save their money into the bank. On the other hand, a lot of discouraged unproductive bank credits will happen. So, growth and structural changes in national product, basic strategy of export-oriented industrialization continued, the second five-year economic development plan, third plan, and fourth plan. As you can see, President Park died in 1979. So before ending of fourth five-year development plan. He could not see ending of fourth five-year economic development plan because he was assassinated in 1979. Okay. Modification of agricultural policy followed, shift to a policy of high grain prices, and initiated new community movement, 새마을 운동, to improve farm village environment and increase agricultural production income. So this farm village movement, new community movement, 새마을 운동 or new community movement, was staged because President Park was more popular in rural area than in urban area. Urban area always stronghold for opposition parties. But rural area is always conservative, and they were politically more lenient to President Park. So President Park wanted to create a certain environment in which villages, rural area can gain something. In other words, President Park wanted to have his political base developed. So one way he gave a lot of government subsidy to make the cemented roads. You see, a lot of rural area, the worst condition in the flood, in the drought, they could not move farm products to nearby city. Road condition was always hampering the rural area. So the first thing new community movement did, every village had one cemented main road so that their final products, farm products, could be shifted to urban area very quickly. And that became very successful project. And after that, many rural area communities began to shift their farm products to beyond the villages, urban area, and improving farm agricultural production facilities. Another modification is the return to the low interest rate policy in the early 1970s. Annual growth rate of GNP at 1970 prices, real GDP, GNP. Look, 1954, 1961 period, we call war reconstruction period, 4.1% growth rate. After that, under President Park, 9.6%, more than doubled. So the economy was moving in a very slow moving vehicle. All of a sudden, after 1962, high-speed vehicle, like sports car, 9.6%. In terms of per capita GNP growth, 1.7% to 7.2%, table 12. Okay. Here is okay, here I make a special remark, and Y is real GDP. Y divided by L, population, per capita, GDP. Because Y is real GDP, L is population. Okay, so according to here, you see, annual growth rate I copied that remark here to let you understand what is going on. Okay, annual growth rate of GNP at 1970 prices, real GDP, from 1950 to 51 is 4.1%. So Y, growth rate of Y is growth rate of Y G means growth rate. Y is 4.1%. Okay. Now, it says per capita GNP, growth rate of Y growth rate of Y divided by L per capita GDP is 1.1%. Note, there is an identity growth rate of Y minus growth rate of L is equal to growth rate of Y not Y divided by L. So in this case, I recover growth rate of L population from given information that should be equal to growth rate of population should be equal to GY minus GY divided by L. So that means in this case, GY was 4.1% minus 1.7%. Therefore, I found growth rate of L to be equal to 2.4%. In other words, during this period, okay, Okay. So here is a class assignment. You see, from this red circled remark, right? So at home, please try to the following question. I solved you here using the identity between real GDP, per capita GDP, and population, and mathematics. In fact, of this is math, log y is equal to log y minus log. I know Russian students are very good in mathematics. This is logarithmic transformation. And any differentiation? Okay, so for example, let me see if I can. Where did I enter this? Okay. Let's see if I can insert any. Can it insert it? No. Okay, so then maybe one other mathematics is d log y with respect to d time is y t minus y t minus 1 in parentheses divided by yt minus 1. In other words, if you take logarithm function with respect to time, derivative, you get automatically that variable's growth rate. That's the property of logarithm equation. So I'm using all these. So for example, here, look at this. I'm using log y divided by L. Then I should be that should be equal to log y minus log L. And if I make transport, then what I do is, the growth rate of YL should be equal to growth rate of Y minus growth rate of L. Okay, this is a fundamental identity we are using. So in this red marked term, look, during 1954-1961, annual growth rate of GNP 4.1%, in per capita terms 1.7%. So I translated this into this here. Okay, during which period? 1954, 1961 period. Okay, that period. We have accounting here. GDP, real GDP growing 4.1%. Per capita GDP growing 1.7%. Okay, then can you say something? Using this identity, what is growth rate of L during this period? That should be equal to, growth rate of L should be equal to growth rate of G Y minus growth rate of Y divided by L. So in this case, I solve for it. Growth rate of Y said 4.1%. Minus growth rate of per capita income 1.7%. Therefore, growth rate of what? Population should be equal to 2.4%. This is the answer. What I'm asking, okay, this is what I'm asking. This is the answer. Okay, now I'm asking you, go back at home, try to conduct similar stuff from 1962 to 1976. You figure out, similar, you've tried to find out GY increased 7.1, 9.6%. Growth rate of per capita income 7.1%. Growth rate of L. This is my class assignment. Okay. '62 through 1976. So you can fill out this. The reason why I'm giving you this exercise, similar question can be asked in your midterm exam. Oh, I'm sorry. Similar question can be asked in your midterm exam. Okay, so please make this exercise available at home and try to repeat this. Okay. Today's lecture, the rest of the thing is an interpretation of these high growth period performance. Okay, first, you can see this picture, this table is annual growth rate of GNP by industrial origin, means by industry. Okay, in real GDP prices by industry. So we can identify where is the source of fastest growth industry. Okay, in looking, you see, let me see if they have a summary table. No. Okay, here, probably, no. Yeah. It's hard to see for you to, but here at the bottom, you have here primary industry, farm products, and industry total manufacturing 11.1%, while farm products, farming increased by 2.5%. Service industries 4.3%. So dominantly manufacturing oriented GDP growth. Okay, you can identify that. Also, share of GDP by industrial origin. For example, manufacturing was only 10.5% 1950s, became 13.8% at the beginning of 1960, but by 1975, it became manufacturing 28%, almost 30%. That means out of 100, in the 1950s, only 10% was manufacturing products. Early 1960, 13% was manufacturing products. But by 1975, out of 100, 30 products were manufacturing based. So very much manufacturing based, social overhead based construction. Fixed investment by industrial origin. You can see industry manufacturing is dominant. Other industries, fixed investment. You can see it here. Domestic resource gap and inflows of foreign capital. Exports were the real engine of growth. For example, in table 15, if you think of annual percentage change in table 15, it's hard to see. You see, it is so small. But for example, this is by source of growth here, exports and goods services by 1974, 1976, share of GNP increased from almost 0% 1953. By 1975, 30%. What does that mean? If there was 100 GNP increase, volume was 100. Previously, less than 1% was devoted to exports. Now, over 30% are going out. South Korea's out of production, 30% were going out into exports. Okay. This transformation is a fascinating story. It's kind of a world miracle. No country ever have within 20 years time lag with so much speed manufacturing process has advanced. That's kind of world record, world miracle, and ultimately Asian miracle. World Bank termed this as Asian miracle, but basically the person, as I will refer to, Nobel Prize laureate, Professor Lucas, termed that is South Korea's miracle. Domestic savings rate, take a look at 1950s. Domestic savings rate was only 7%, less than 7. What does that mean? At that time, if you earn 100, only 7%, $100, $7 was saved. But by 1974, 18.7% out of $100 earned, 18% was saved. So this rapid domestic savings increase makes Korea's industrialization domestically financed. At the beginning, they could not finance domestically because their domestic savings rate was so low. But as time passes, by 1975, 18.7% domestic savings rate. So with this savings rate, if investment rate is 10% or 15%, ultimately fully financed by domestic savings rate. Okay. Particularly, business firms' savings rate is remarkable, very high compared to household. Okay. By 1957, 1962, 4% growth in total employment per year, and structure of employment retained stable. Average annual growth rate of non-agricultural, including manufacturing, was similar to agricultural employment. In 1963, over 60% of the total labor force was still engaged in agriculture and fishing. About 16.4% of the urban labor force was unemployed. Post-Korean War children reached military maturity. See table 1, total population growth rate 2.2%. Population 14 years old and over growth rate non-farm employment increased at 7.2% per year, while farm employment increased 1.3%. Total employment grew 3.9%. The structure changed dramatically. Agricultural employment, 63%. 1950s, out of 100 population in South Korea, 63 people, one out of 100, were agricultural farmers, but became 45%. A lot of agricultural farmers population reduction. While manufacturing employment was during 1950s, 8% increased to 21.3%. Table 18, please pay attention to table 18. And then in your midterm exam, for example, I can give you table 17, I can give you table 18, and I may ask you to interpret. Multiple choice. Among these four interpretations, which describes correct description? Choose one. In other words, you always match textbook explanation with textbook tables. Okay? That way, you learn how employment, for example, labor productivity by sector has changed, for example. What is employment and labor productivity? For example, if you look at this from 1963 to 1976, manufacturing case, look at, for example. Employment was only 610,000, but increased superbly 2 million, 2.6 million by 1976. What is the share? Out of total labor force, 1963 manufacturing occupied only 8%. By 1976, 21% of manufacturing. In other words, out of 100, 21% were engaged in manufacturing by 1976. Formally, by 1963, out of 100, only 8 people were engaged in manufacturing. Okay. What is right-hand side? Value added per worker. Value added per worker means GDP produced by population per worker. So if you can think of manufacturing, out of 1,001 GDP, manufacturing was produced 217, 1963. 1976, out of 1,001, 501, almost 494, one much out of 1,000, 49% or 50% much value added per worker was created in manufacturing. Okay. We call value added per worker labor productivity. Per worker, how much do you produce? Okay, so labor productivity is value added per worker in this table. See table 19, inflation rate during 1953-1963, GDP deflator 16.7%, WPI 15.0%, CPI 14.5%. The post-war inflation has changed relative prices. Real wages in manufacturing remained stable until mid-1960s, but rose rapidly to double by the mid-1970s. The improvement in farm income was lower than the rise in real urban wages. Real interest rates on bank deposits and loans were negative in 1963-64 because of years of high inflation. However, due to 1965 interest rate reforms and relative price stability until 1972, real interest rates rose to 10%, 15%. Inflation rates, for example, during 50s, Seoul Consumer Index, price index, reached 36.6% by 1953, calmed down 15%, but still persistently very high by 1973. Another inflation indicator, GDP deflator, very similar structure. Okay, so that will end today's class, and I will start from slide 19. Mr. An, please remind that slide 19. At this point, I will make a very important remark due to, let me see, where is app? Okay. Next week is what? March. What is the date? Next Monday. Today is March 4, March 11, right? Monday. Lecture time is 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Okay, that's it. Okay, Mr. An, please by email remind this shortened 1 hour lecture time, growth accounting only, will be given. Due to my sudden sort of emergency meeting schedule change, I had to convene not from 5 p.m., but from 5:30 p.m. Okay? Thank you for all of you, and I will see you next week at 5:30 p.m. Seoul time. Thank you.